Kara sat quietly in the crowded intergalactic transport ship. It was one of the busiest ships traveling between planets, filled with aliens from all over the galaxy. Some were tall, others short. Some had smooth, shiny skin, while others had rough, scaly scales. But none of them were like her. Kara was different. She was what they called ugly. Her species, the Horelians, were known for their bumpy, uneven skin and sharp features. Their bodies were sturdy, but not sleek like many of the other alien species. Her wide, grayish-blue eyes and long, jagged ears set her apart, but it was her appearance that drew all the unwanted attention. Kara's people were often avoided by others, laughed at, or just plain ignored. As she moved through the ship, she noticed the usual glances. The passengers would look at her, then quickly look away, making sure not to meet her eyes. Some shifted, their seats creating a large space around her, as if she had some kind of invisible barrier around her. The whispers were quiet, but they were always there. She could hear the soft hisses of people making fun of her appearance or even the nervous chuckles when she walked by. But Kara kept her head high. She had learned to ignore the stares and whispers. She had to. It was the only way to survive in a galaxy where people valued beauty above all else. She walked past groups of travelers, her long, heavy boots thudding against the metallic floor, her eyes fixed ahead. She would not let their cruel looks break her. As she entered the dining area, she saw the usual scene. Most of the seats were taken, and the ones that weren't were far away from the others, tucked into corners where no one could see. It was clear that the other passengers wanted to avoid her. Kara stood by the food counter, taking a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. Her stomach growled, but the thought of sitting alone made her hesitate. She glanced around the room. There, near the far wall, was an empty seat. It wasn't close to anyone. It was tucked away in a corner, as usual. She made her way toward it, her heavy steps echoing in the quiet room. As she sat down, she couldn't help but notice how the passengers nearby subtly shifted away. They didn't want to be near her. Kara had gotten used to it, but today it stung more than usual. She glanced around the room again and noticed a human sitting by himself. He wasn't the tallest or the strongest looking of the humans she had seen. His hair was brown, and he had the kind of rough, simple look that most humans had. His eyes were a bright green, though, full of energy. His name, she overheard, was Derek. He was just a regular man, not some great hero or powerful leader, but there was something different about him. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't making fun of her, nor was he avoiding her. He was sitting there quietly, his food untouched and his attention focused on something in his lap. She had never spoken to him, and he had never spoken to her. They had only passed each other in the hallways. But for some reason, she found herself looking at him again. It wasn't because he was handsome or anything like that. She had seen plenty of good-looking people, and they didn't mean anything to her. No, it was because for the first time since she boarded the ship, someone wasn't treating her like she was invisible. He wasn't looking at her like she was some kind of joke. Kara stared at him for a long moment, wondering why he seemed so calm, so unbothered by the way others treated her. It was as if he didn't notice her appearance at all. She found herself wishing that she could walk over and sit with him, but she was too proud, too afraid of another rejection. She took a deep breath, then returned her gaze to her meal, pretending not to notice the growing loneliness. The minutes passed slowly. She ate in silence, and the hum of the ship's engine in the background felt oddly soothing. Kara glanced around at the other passengers. They were chatting, laughing, eating in groups, but none of them looked at her. She was the outsider, the one who didn't belong. No one ever spoke to her. No one ever tried. Her attention shifted back to Derek. He hadn't moved, his eyes still focused on the screen in front of him. What was he doing? She was so used to seeing people avoid her that she had forgotten what it felt like for someone to simply be normal around her. She sat back in her chair, staring out at the window. Stars glimmered far in the distance, but the beauty of the galaxy didn't reach her. It never did. The ship continued its journey. passing through the endless void, and Kara felt just as lost as the stars outside. But then something happened that she wasn't expecting. She felt eyes on her again. But this time, it wasn't the usual cold, judgmental stare. It was Derek. He was looking at her. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her feel noticed. His gaze was calm, curious but not dismissive. There was no fear, no disgust, just understanding. Kara quickly turned her head, hoping he hadn't seen her look back. Why did he stare at her like that? Was she imagining it? No one ever looked at her like that. She tried to focus on her food, but her mind kept drifting back to him. The rest of the meal passed quietly. Kara finished her meal, left the dining area, and returned to her quarters. But as she lay down on her bed, the image of Derek's eyes stayed with her. She couldn't stop thinking about how different he was from everyone else. For the first time in years, Kara found herself hoping that someone who wasn't just a fellow Hurelian, might see her for who she truly was, not just the ugly alien on the ship. But would that ever happen? She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the ship and the silence of her room fill her thoughts. The loneliness was always there, but now there was a small spark of something else. Hope. Kara woke up the next morning with the soft hum of the ship surrounding her. The night had passed quickly and she had barely slept, thoughts of Derek still running through her mind. The way he looked at her, the way he didn't recoil, didn't treat her like the rest of them. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't used to. She wasn't sure why, but the thought of him lingered with her as she got ready for the day. The ship was already bustling when she made her way to the breakfast hall. The same cold stares met her as she entered. The passengers, as usual, shifted their seats, leaving the table in the back corner empty for her. Kara sighed. It was like clockwork. No one ever spoke to her unless they absolutely had to. She sat, down at her usual spot, far from the others, and began to eat her meal in silence. The food was tasteless, but she had grown used to it. It was the quiet that made the meal unbearable. She glanced up, and there he was, Derek. He was sitting by himself again, looking at his tablet. His posture was relaxed, unlike the others who seemed to sit on edge, afraid of getting too close. For a moment, their eyes met. Kara quickly looked down at her plate, embarrassed by the thought that she might be staring. Her stomach twisted uncomfortably, and she focused on the food in front of her. But Derek didn't look away. He kept his gaze steady, and for the first time since she'd arrived on the ship, Kara felt a slight warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't a look of pity or disgust, it was simply a look of curiosity, understanding. She couldn't tell, but it was different from the usual harshness. It felt like a small victory, a tiny crack in the armor of isolation she had built around herself. Maybe she wasn't invisible to everyone after all, but then, just as quickly, as the moment started, it ended. Derek looked back down at his tablet and continued whatever task he was doing. Kara's heart sank. It was foolish to think that something had changed. She was still the same alien, sitting alone, out of place. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, like a shadow she couldn't outrun. As the meal ended, Kara stood up and began to make her way out of the dining hall. She heard the quiet whispers of the others, the subtle way they avoided looking at her. Her shoulders slumped. She had learned to ignore it, but it never got any easier. Every time, it felt like a sting. She walked past Derek's table, hoping he wouldn't notice her, but as she did, she heard his voice call out, "Hey, Kara." The words hit her like a shock. She stopped in her tracks, confused. No one ever called her by name. She hadn't even introduced herself to him. Turning slowly, she looked back at him. He was still sitting there, his green eyes warm, his voice calm. "I was just wondering if you wanted to join me for a walk around the observation deck later. You know, just to stretch your legs." His smile was small but genuine. Kara blinked. A part of her wanted to say no, to brush him off, to keep walking and hide in the corners of the ship where no one would ever notice her. But another part of her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, wanted to say yes. She swallowed, hard. trying to calm the rush of emotions building inside her. She nodded, even though it felt like the hardest thing she'd ever done. "Okay," she replied quietly. "I'll meet you there." Derek gave her a nod, and before she could think of anything else to say, she turned and walked away. Her mind was racing. What had just happened? Was it real? Was he actually asking her to spend time with him without any judgment? She didn't know what to expect, but for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. The rest of the day passed slowly. Kara spent most of it in her quarters, trying to distract herself with the few books she had brought with her. But she couldn't stop thinking about the walk with Derek. She had no idea why he wanted to spend time with her, and she wasn't sure if she should be excited or terrified. He could be like the others, just being kind out of some misguided pity, or maybe, just maybe, he was different. When the time finally came, Kara stood up from her bed and walked to the observation deck. The bright, shining stars outside the massive windows filled her with a sense of calm, but her nerves were still unsettled. She paced for a few minutes, her mind racing with all sorts of questions. Finally, she saw Derek walking toward her. His face was the same calm, unbothered expression he always wore, and she couldn't help but feel a little less nervous as he got closer. "You made it," he said with a smile. "I wasn't sure if you'd show up." "I almost didn't," Kara admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "But I wanted to." He nodded, understanding without needing her to explain further. "I get it," he said. "Sometimes it's hard to just take a chance, but I'm glad you did." They stood there for a moment, the silence comfortable for once. The stars outside sparkled like little diamonds, and for the first time in a long time, Kara didn't feel completely alone. She glanced at Derek, still unsure of what to say. "So," Derek began, breaking the silence. "What's your story? You never really talk about where you're from or why you're traveling alone." Kara hesitated, but for some reason it didn't feel as hard to speak as it usually did. She looked out at the stars, gathering her thoughts. "I'm from a planet called Zarnak. My people, we're not exactly welcome in the galaxy. We're different, too different for most to accept. So I travel alone, like I always have." Derek listened carefully, not interrupting her. When she finished, he took a deep breath, thinking for a moment. "I think it's a shame," he said. "You deserve better than that." Kara didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her before. The words felt almost foreign, but at the same time, they felt like something she'd always needed to hear. "Thanks," she said softly, not knowing if she was speaking to him or to herself. As the conversation continued, the tension slowly melted away. For once, Kara felt like she could simply be herself, without worrying about how she looked or what others thought of her. Derek's presence was calming, and the connection between them grew with each passing word. When the walk ended, Kara felt lighter than she had in a long time. She didn't know what would come of this unexpected bond, but she was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone in the galaxy as she had always believed. The next few days passed slowly for Kara. She tried to focus on her tasks and avoid the quiet whispers and cold stares from the other passengers. But each time she saw Derek, a sense of warmth washed over her. He never treated her like the others did. There was something different about him, something genuine. He didn't make her feel like an outsider. The walks they shared became moments she looked forward to, even if they were brief. The ship continued its journey through the vast reaches of space, traveling between planets with time stretching on endlessly. Kara kept to herself, though she could feel Derek's presence more and more. He would sometimes greet her in the hallways with a nod, or even a simple hello. Each time she found herself smiling, something she hadn't done in a long time. One evening, as she sat at her usual spot in the dining hall, the ship suddenly jolted. Kara's plate slipped from the table and crashed onto the floor, scattering food everywhere. The lights flickered, and there was a loud, unsettling noise from the engine room. The other passengers immediately began to panic, running around and shouting, unsure of what was happening. Kara's heart raced as she stood up, trying to steady herself against the shaking walls of the ship. She could hear the alarms blaring in the distance, and the crew members were scrambling to manage the emergency. The ship had been hit by a series of smaller meteors, causing damage to the hull. As chaos spread around her, Kara froze for a moment. She wasn't trained in dealing with emergencies like this. The other passengers were running in every direction, and she knew that if she didn't act quickly, they might be trapped or worse. But she couldn't bring herself to move. Then she felt a strong hand on her shoulder. Kara turned to find Derek, standing next to her, his expression calm amidst the chaos. "We need to help the crew," he said, his voice steady. "They're trying to fix the engines, but we need to keep the other passengers in check." Kara hesitated for a second. She wasn't used to being the one to act, but something in Derek's eyes told her that now was the time to do something. "Right," she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Let's go." Together they moved through the panicking crowd. Derek led the way, his calm demeanor helping to clear a path. Kara followed him, feeling a strange sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. They reached the central control area, where the ship's crew was already working tirelessly to assess the damage. One of the crew members, a tall, wiry alien with blue skin, looked up at them in surprise. "What are you doing here?" he asked, clearly annoyed by the intrusion. "We're here to help," Derek said. "If you don't mind." The crew member looked at him skeptically, but nodded. "Fine, but stay out of the way." Kara watched as Derek walked toward a nearby terminal, checking the ship's diagnostics. He had a focused expression on his face, like he knew exactly what to do. Kara felt a sudden rush of admiration for him. He wasn't panicking or running for safety, like everyone else. He was doing something. She looked around the control room, trying to find a way she could help. The walls were lined with complex machines and flashing screens, but none of it made sense to her. Her mind raced. She couldn't just stand there, not when people needed help. She spotted a fire extinguisher on the wall, next to a small panel that seemed to be sparking. Without thinking, she grabbed the extinguisher and rushed over to the panel. The sparks were dangerous, and she knew it wouldn't be long before they caused a fire. Derek turned to see her actions, his eyes wide. "Kara, wait," he called out, but it was too late. She pressed the button to release the extinguisher and sprayed the panel, putting out the sparks. The crew member who had earlier questioned them rushed over, his face tight with frustration. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just—" But then he stopped short. He looked at the now extinguished panel and back at Kara. For the first time there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Good thinking," he muttered, before turning back to his work. Kara stood there, still holding the extinguisher, her heart pounding. She had never done anything like that before. The adrenaline was still rushing through her veins, but she couldn't help but feel proud of herself. She had done something useful. Derek gave her a nod of approval. "Nice work," he said. Kara smiled at him. "I didn't think it would work," she admitted, laughing nervously. "You never know until you try," he replied. As the crew worked to fix the engines and restore the ship's systems, Kara felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. It was as though the weight of her past isolation had been lifted just a little bit. She had done something important, something that mattered. The ship's alarms eventually stopped, and the shaking subsided. The crew had managed to stabilize. The ship and the passengers began to settle down. The fear and chaos in the air slowly dissipated, and people began to go back to their seats, talking among themselves, though still on edge. Kara looked at Derek, who was standing next to her, watching the crew finish their work. "I can't believe we did it," she said, feeling the weight of the moment. She had been part of something, and it had been meaningful. "We did it together," Derek said with a smile. "And you did great. That was some quick thinking." Kara blushed slightly at the praise. It felt so strange to hear someone say something positive about her for once. "Thanks," she said quietly. For the first time in a long while, Kara didn't feel invisible. She had contributed, she had helped, and for a brief moment, she felt like she truly belonged. As the rest of the passengers began to relax, Kara and Derek stayed in the control room, watching the stars through the windows. The quiet between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. They didn't need words to express how much had changed between them. Kara was no longer just the ugly alien. She was someone who had helped save the ship, someone who was valued. And as she looked at Derek, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than just the outsider in this galaxy. Maybe she could be part of something bigger. And with that thought, she felt the tiniest spark of hope flicker inside. After the crisis on the ship, things seemed to calm down. The crew continued their work, and the passengers, though still on edge, began to settle back into their routines. Kara, however, felt different. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like an outsider. The experience of helping with the emergency had changed something inside her. She had acted, she had mattered, and that made all the difference. Over the next few days, Kara found herself seeking out Derek more often. Not in an obvious way, but in small moments. If she saw him in the hallway, she would offer a quiet greeting. If she passed by the observation deck, she would linger, wondering if he would come by. She wasn't sure why. It wasn't like she had never interacted with others before, but with Derek, it felt different. It felt real. Derek, too, seemed to seek her out. He would often stop by her seat in the dining hall to chat, or he would join her on the observation deck where they would talk for hours. It was easy with him. He didn't ask about her past, didn't make her feel like she needed to explain anything. He just listened, and that was all she needed. One afternoon, as the ship glided through the stars, Derek and Kara found themselves sitting on the edge of the observation deck, staring out at the endless void of space. The sun from a distant star cast a warm glow across the room, and the cool metallic walls of the ship seemed to fade into the background. Kara leaned against the glass, her eyes following the trails of distant stars. For a moment, she forgot about the judgment she had faced for so long. She wasn't the ugly alien here. She was just Kara, sitting with Derek and enjoying the silence that had become so comfortable between them. "So, what made you decide to come on this trip?" Derek asked suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet. Kara looked at him, surprised by the question. It was the first time he had asked about her journey. She hesitated, unsure of how much she wanted to share, but there was something about Derek's sincerity that made her want to tell him. "I'm looking for something," she said softly. "Something I can't really find on my home planet. My people. We've been isolated for so long, treated like we don't belong. I thought maybe I could find a place where I'm not just a stranger, a place where I could fit in." Derek nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "That's a tough journey," he said quietly. "But sometimes, it's the journey itself that matters. Even if you don't find exactly what you're looking for, you can still discover something about yourself along the way." Kara looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I don't know if I've discovered anything yet," she said, "but maybe I'm starting to understand what you mean." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something peaceful in the way the stars outside twinkled, like they were telling a story only they could understand. After a while, Derek spoke again, his voice light. "You know, I think you're right. Sometimes it's the journey that counts, and I think for me this trip was about meeting people who aren't afraid to be themselves no matter what." Kara turned to look at him, sensing that there was more behind his words. "What do you mean?" Derek shrugged slightly, as though it wasn't something he often talked about. "Well, I used to be afraid of being judged too. I've had my own struggles, fitting in, trying to figure out where I belong. But the more I meet people like you, the more I realize it's not about fitting in with everyone else. It's about finding your own place, your own people." Kara didn't know what to say at first. She had always thought that if she could just change her appearance, or if the people around her could see her differently, maybe things would be better. But Derek's words made her think. Maybe fitting in wasn't the point. Maybe it was about being true to herself and not hiding who she was. For the first time, Kara felt like she was starting to understand what Derek had meant when he said the journey was important. Maybe it wasn't about changing herself to meet others' expectations. Maybe it was about finding people who accepted her as she was, people like Derek. I think I'm starting to get it, she said quietly. It's not about being someone I'm not. It's about finding people who accept me just as I am. Derek smiled, his eyes bright. Exactly. And I think you're already on your way. You've got something most people don't. You don't hide who you are. Kara felt a small laugh bubble up from her chest. It felt good, and she realized she hadn't laughed like that in a long time. I don't know if I'd call myself perfect, she said with a grin. But I'm definitely starting to feel like maybe I don't need to be. No one's perfect, Derek said. But that's what makes people interesting. We all have something to offer, even if we don't always see it ourselves. Kara smiled again, feeling a little lighter than before. She wasn't perfect, and maybe she never would be. But she was beginning to see that it didn't matter. She didn't have to change to fit in. She just had to be herself. As the days passed, their conversations became more frequent, and their bond grew stronger. They would walk around the ship together, share meals, and talk about everything and nothing. Kara found herself looking forward to every moment spent with Derek, something she hadn't expected when they first met. She had thought he was just another person who would ignore her, but he had turned out to be so much more. One day, as they sat together in the observation room, Kara found herself feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The ship was no longer just a place of isolation for her. It had become a place where she could be herself, surrounded by people who didn't care about her appearance or where she came from. People like Derek, who had shown her that she didn't need to hide. So, what's next for you? Derek asked, breaking the silence. Kara looked at him, her heart full. I'm not sure, she said honestly. But I think I'm ready to find out. As the days passed, the bond between Kara and Derek grew even stronger. The connection they had was something neither of them had expected, but it felt real. They spent more time together, sharing meals, talking about their pasts, their dreams, and the things that made them who they were. The more they spoke, the more Kara realized just how much she had been missing in her life. She had been so focused on surviving, on hiding from the world, that she hadn't allowed herself to truly connect with anyone. But now, with Derek, she felt like she was finally starting to live instead of just exist. One morning, the ship hit another obstacle. This time, it wasn't meteors or technical malfunctions. It was something far more dangerous. A pirate ship. The alarm systems on the ship blared and the crew scrambled to respond. Panic spread through the passengers and Kara felt her heart begin to race. The last time something had gone wrong on this ship, she had acted quickly. But this time, the danger felt more real. Pirates were known for being ruthless, and they didn't hesitate to take whatever they wanted. Kara and Derek were in the dining hall when the alarm sounded. They both stood up immediately, instinctively moving toward the exit. Derek grabbed her arm, his grip firm, but his eyes were calm. We need to stay close to the crew, he said, his voice steady. They'll know what to do. Kara nodded, her breath shallow. She had never faced anything like this before. Pirates were something her people had only heard about in stories. The reality of it was terrifying, but she wasn't alone this time. She had Derek, and that gave her a sense of reassurance. They made their way to the central control room where the crew was already working to prepare for the pirate ship's arrival. The ship's captain, a tall alien with 4 arms, was barking orders to the crew, making sure everyone was ready for what was about to happen. Everyone, listen up, the captain shouted. We're going to be boarded. We don't know how many pirates there are, but we need to protect the ship and the passengers at all costs. Stay calm and follow the crew's instructions. Kara stood next to Derek, watching the crew move with precision. It was clear they had dealt with this kind of thing before, but the tension in the air was palpable. The ship shook again, this time more violently, and Kara could hear the sound of blaster fire in the distance. The pirates were getting closer. We need to move, Derek said, his voice low. The control room is too exposed. Let's find a safer place. Kara nodded, and they both quickly turned to leave the room. As they moved down the hallway, the ship jolted again and they heard footsteps behind them. They turned to see 2 crew members running toward them, their faces grim. The pirates are boarding the ship, one of the crew members said. We need to get you to a secure area, Now! Kara felt her stomach drop. There was no time to think. The ship was under attack and she had no idea what would happen next. But as she looked at Derek, she realized something. She wasn't scared because of the danger. She was scared because she didn't want to lose him. She had come so far in such a short time, and now, with everything on the line, she didn't want to go back to being alone. Derek must have sensed her fear because he reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, but comforting. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady. Kara nodded, trying to believe him. They followed the crew members through the corridors, eventually reaching a hidden compartment deep within the ship. It was a small, secure space where the passengers would be kept safe in case of an emergency. Kara and Derek sat together in the corner, the quiet hum of the ship the only sound as they waited. Time seemed to stretch on for hours. The sounds of blaster fire and shouting outside grew louder, and the ship shook with every impact. Kara's heart pounded in her chest, but she stayed close to Derek, feeling his presence next to her. She didn't know what was happening outside, but she trusted the crew to handle it, and she trusted Derek. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door to the compartment opened. The crew member who had been guiding them stepped inside, his face covered in sweat, but his expression relieved. "It's over," the crew member said. "The pirates have been dealt with. We've secured the ship and the passengers are safe." Kara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She looked at Derek, her heart still racing. "We're safe," she whispered. Derek gave her a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, we are." The ship slowly began to settle, the shaking finally coming to a stop. Kara and Derek remained in the compartment for a while longer, waiting for the all-clear signal. As the minutes passed, Kara found herself reflecting on what had just happened. She had faced something terrifying, but she hadn't been alone. Derek had been by her side the entire time, and for the first time in her life, she had someone she could count on, someone who had been there when she needed them most. Finally, the door to the compartment opened again, and the crew member smiled at them. "You're free to go," he said. "The pirates are gone, and everything is secure now." Kara stood up, feeling the weight of the last few hours slowly lifting from her shoulders. She looked at Derek, and for the first time since the attack began, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't just because the danger was over. It was because for the first time in a long time she felt like she had a place where she belonged. Derek turned to her, his expression soft. "Are you okay?" Kara nodded, her heart full. "Yeah, I am." They walked back to the main hall where the other passengers were starting to gather. There were signs of the attack, scratches on the walls, broken glass. But no one was seriously hurt. The crew had done their job and the ship was safe. As they stood there watching the passengers slowly return to their seats, Kara realized that the moment had changed her. She had been through something dangerous, something that had tested her, in ways she never expected. But she had made it through not because she was stronger than anyone else, but because she hadn't faced it alone. Derek had been there, and that made all the difference. The ship was finally calm again. The sounds of chaos had faded, replaced by the hum of the engines and the quiet voices of passengers as they slowly returned to their seats. The pirates, once a looming threat, were gone. The crew had done their job, and the passengers, shaken but unharmed, began to relax. Kara stood with Derek in the middle of the dining hall, both of them taking in the relief that came with knowing the danger had passed. For the first time, Kara felt a sense of peace settle inside her. The terror of the past few hours was still fresh in her mind, but she wasn't afraid anymore. It wasn't just because the pirates had been dealt with. It was because she wasn't alone. Derek had been with her every step of the way, offering her strength when she needed it most. As the ship resumed its course, Kara couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. She had started this journey feeling like an outsider, someone unworthy of being seen. But now, after everything, after the moments of kindness from Derek, after the challenge of facing danger together, she realized that she wasn't as alone as she had once believed. "Are you all right?" Derek asked, his voice soft as he looked at her. His eyes held a mix of concern and understanding, something she had come to recognize over the past few days. It was the same expression he had when they first met, the same quiet kindness. Kara nodded slowly, the weight of the past few days still heavy on her shoulders but no longer as overwhelming. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady. "I'm okay. Really, I am." Derek smiled at her, a small, reassuring smile that made Kara feel a little lighter. "Good," he said, his voice warm. "You did great. We both did." Kara smiled back, but it wasn't the same forced smile she had worn in the past. This time, it was real. She had faced a terrifying experience, but she had done so with courage and with the support of someone who cared. She wasn't just the ugly alien anymore. She wasn't just the person no one wanted to sit next to or talk to. She was Kara, and she mattered. As the days passed, Kara found herself changing. It wasn't just because she had faced the pirates or because she had helped save the ship. It was because for the first time she had allowed herself to truly connect with someone. Derek had shown her that she didn't have to hide who she was. She didn't have to be ashamed of her appearance or her past. She could be herself, and that was enough. She continued to spend time with Derek, their conversations growing deeper with each passing day. They talked about their hopes for the future, about the things they wanted to see and do. Derek told her about Earth, about the quiet beauty of his home planet, and about the way humans had learned to embrace their differences rather than hide them. Kara listened with interest, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't felt before. She wasn't just learning about Earth, she was learning about herself. One evening, as they walked through the quiet corridors of the ship, Kara stopped and looked out the window. The stars were as beautiful as always, shining brightly in the darkness, but this time she didn't feel lost in the vastness of space. This time, she felt like she was part of something. She was no longer just drifting through the galaxy alone. "This trip has been unexpected," Kara said, her voice thoughtful. She glanced at Derek, who was walking beside her. "I never thought I would find someone like you." Derek smiled, his eyes reflecting the soft light from the stars outside. "I feel the same way," he said. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you either." Kara's heart fluttered at his words, and for a moment the weight of everything, the years of isolation, the judgment, the fear, felt lighter. She wasn't just finding a place in the universe. She was finding someone who understood her, someone who saw her for who she truly was. As they stood there looking out at the stars, Kara realized that she wasn't just waiting for something to change anymore. She wasn't waiting for someone to accept her. She was ready to accept herself, to embrace her own worth. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in the galaxy where she truly belonged. "I'm glad I met you, Derek," she said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. "I think I'm finally starting to see that maybe I don't have to be perfect. I just need to be me." Derek's smile widened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and comforting. "You're already perfect just the way you are," he said softly. "And that's all that matters." Kara looked at him, her heart full. For the first time in her life, she felt like she didn't have to hide. She didn't have to pretend to be something she wasn't. She could be Kara, the alien woman with uneven skin and jagged ears, the one who had been rejected by so many, but who had found a place in this vast galaxy, a place where she belonged. And it wasn't just about fitting in. It was about finding the people who would accept her as she was. And now, with Derek by her side, she had someone who saw her not for her appearance but for her heart. That was all she needed. As the days passed, Kara continued her journey with renewed confidence. The ship would eventually reach its destination, but the journey itself had already changed her. She was no longer just drifting through the galaxy. She was living, truly living, for the first time. And for the first time, Kara looked out at the stars with a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid of it. With Derek by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Because for the first time, she knew that she didn't have to do it alone.